This is a presentation for Chapter 6, Section 2, Renewable and Non-Renewable Resources. Remember to fill in your notes as we go for your science notebook, and make sure you pause the video as you need to get all of those notes filled in. Let's start out with a little bit of a learning objective review here from Chapter 6, Section 1. The learning objective for that chapter asked which human activities can affect the biosphere. And remember that those human activities, some of those human activities that can affect the biosphere include hunting and gathering, agriculture, industry, and urban development. So that brings us to the learning objectives for this section. And what we are going to learn this time around is we're going to explain how environmental resources are classified, and we're going to identify the characteristics of sustainable development. So let's jump right in by our first key concept question. How are environmental resources classified? Well, environmental resources and the goods and services may be classified as either renewable or non-renewable, and we'll talk about what each of those means specifically. First, a renewable resource. It can be considered renewable if it can regenerate, if they are alive, or it can be replenished by biochemical cycles if they are non-living. So a tree is an example of a renewable resource because a new tree can be planted in place of an old tree that dies or cuts down. And we'll actually talk about more specifically about forest resources as we go through, and the difference between an old forest and a new forest. And generally speaking, a tree is an example of a renewable resource because a new one can just be planted. The water cycle is an example of a renewable resource. We can renew water. Sunlight is an example of a renewable resource because that's always coming back around. Then we have non-renewable resources, and this is a resource that cannot be replenished by natural processes. In the last section, we talked about fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gas. These are non-renewable resources because once these fuels are depleted, they are gone forever. A good rule of thumb for non-renewable resources is if you have to mine it or dig it out of the ground, it is not going to be a renewable resource just because it doesn't grow back. If you have to search for it and find it, it's not going to be a renewable resource. The next key concept question we have is what effects do human activities have on natural resources? And human activities can affect the quality and supply of renewable resources such as land, forests, fisheries, air, and fresh water. And we'll talk about each of those real quickly coming up here. But first, I want to talk a little bit about sustainable development. And this is a way of using those natural resources that we're going to talk about without depleting them. So depleting means to get rid of. So this is a way of using those natural resources without getting rid of them and being able to continue to provide for human needs without causing long-term environmental harm. So without getting rid of them and without harming the environment, and that's called sustainable development. So the first resource that's one of our natural resources is our land resources. And land provides space for human communities and also raw materials for industry. So it's space for where we can live and raw materials such as trees for building and crops for eating, and this is part of industry. Land also includes the soil in which these crops are grown. If managed properly, soil is a renewable resource. Then we have the forest resources. Earth's forests are an important resource for products they provide and for the ecological functions they perform. Now forests, they can go away quickly with lumbering, and that's really important that we keep these forests around and that we're able to sustain some of them because forests provide wood for products and fuel. They remove carbon dioxide and produce oxygen. They store nutrients. They provide habitats and food for different organisms. They help to moderate climate. They limit soil erosion, which is important to keep our soil for our agriculture. And they also help to protect some fresh water supplies. So these are reasons why our forests are really important and that we don't cut them all down and make a blank slate out of the earth. We need those forests for these reasons. Now, as I stated earlier, whether a forest can be considered a renewable resource depends partly on the type of forest. Temperate forests of the Northeast are renewable because they have been logged and have grown back naturally. So we kind of live in that area where, if we have lumber, we cut some forest down, they will grow back naturally. So that's not a big deal. However, there are old growth forests, such as those in Alaska and in the Pacific Northwest. Then these are called non-renewable because it takes a very long time, centuries, which are hundreds of years, to produce them. So the fact that they just don't regrow within a couple of years makes them considered non-renewable because it takes so long for them to regrow. So trees and forests can actually be considered both. It just depends on the type of the forest it is. Then we have fishery resources, and fishes and other animals that live in the water are a valuable source of food. So we want to make sure that we maintain those and we don't overfish our lakes so that the food can keep producing. Then we have air resources, and these are pretty important because the condition of air affects people's health. We sometimes get something called smog, which is a mixture of chemicals that occur as a gray-brown haze in the atmosphere. And smog is due to automobile exhausts and industrial emissions. It is considered a pollutant because it threatens people's health, so smog can be very, very dangerous. Now, we talked about it being a pollutant, and what a pollutant is a harmful material that can enter the biosphere either through the land, air, or water. And sometimes the burning of those fossil fuels that we talked about can release pollutants that cause smog and other problems in the atmosphere. So to sum it all up here for this lesson, how are environmental resources classified? Well, environmental resources are classified as either renewable or non-renewable. And then what are the characteristics of sustainable development? Well, the characteristics of sustainable development include using natural resources without depleting them and providing for human needs without causing long-term environmental harm. And with those things, we should be able to maintain our earth for a very long time. And our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren hopefully will still be able to live on this earth and to use its resources and protect the resources that we have today. That's the end of the notes and presentation for Chapter 6-2. Hope you got everything down. If not, go back and get what you need, fill it all in so you have it available to put into your science notebook. See you later.